The dust of war had barely settled over the shattered cities of Japan when the first American soldiers arrived. For years, Japanese women had been fed a relentless diet of propaganda, depicting these foreign invaders as monstrous, barbaric devils intent on rape and destruction. Their hearts pounded with a terror born of indoctrination, their minds braced for the unspeakable horrors they were told awaited them. Yet as the jeeps rolled in and the GIs disembarked, a profound, unsettling silence fell over the terrified populace. What they witnessed next was not the savagery they had been promised, but something entirely different, something that would forever redefine their understanding of strength and humanity. It was a sight that made them stop, stare, and question everything they had ever believed. The late summer of 1945 cast a pall of smoke and despair over the Japanese archipelago. From the bombed-out skeletal remains of Tokyo to the smoldering ruins of Yokohama and the flattened industrial heartland of Osaka, a nation lay prostrate, its spirit as broken as its infrastructure. The air itself seemed heavy with the scent of ash, defeat, and an overwhelming, pervasive fear. For the women of Japan, this fear was particularly acute, a cold dread that seeped into their bones. Wartime propaganda had been a relentless, insidious force, painting the American enemy as subhuman beasts, devoid of honor or mercy, whose arrival would herald an era of unimaginable atrocities. They had been told to expect rape, torture, and the systematic extermination of their people. Many had prepared for suicide, clutching small knives or poison, ready to protect their honor and their children from the impending savagery. They hid in what remained of their homes, in makeshift shelters, or in the countryside, their eyes wide with terror, their ears straining for the sounds of the approaching monsters. The strategic reality was stark. Japan was utterly devastated, its military crushed, its cities incinerated, its population traumatized by years of war and the recent cataclysmic atomic bombings. The propaganda machine, designed to steel the populace for a fight to the death, had succeeded only in instilling a deep-seated terror of the victor. Into this landscape of desolation and dread stepped the American soldiers. These were not the faceless, demonic figures of Japanese wartime lore. They were young men, many barely out of their teens, drawn from the diverse tapestry of America. Farm boys from Ohio, factory workers from Michigan, cowboys from Texas, college students from California. They arrived not as conquerors seeking vengeance, but as occupiers tasked with rebuilding a shattered nation and establishing a new order. Crucially, they carried with them not just their rifles and rations, but an ingrained set of American values, a belief in fairness, an inherent optimism, a respect for individual dignity, and a pragmatic, can-do spirit. They were, in essence, ambassadors of a culture that, despite its own flaws and prejudices, fundamentally valued human life and sought to uplift rather than destroy. The initial encounters were tentative, fraught with tension. Japanese women, peeking from behind shattered walls or from the cover of rubble, watched with bated breath as the American convoys moved through their devastated towns. They expected shouts, aggression, perhaps even immediate violence. Instead, they witnessed something profoundly disorienting. American soldiers, often with a bewildered or even sympathetic expression, began to interact with the civilian population. They were seen distributing K-rations, not just to their fellow soldiers, but to starving Japanese children who cautiously approached them. They offered chocolate, a rare and precious commodity, with a gentle smile. They helped clear debris, not with the brutal efficiency of an invading force, but with a surprising willingness to assist. They treated the elderly with a deference that was unexpected, and they showed a genuine, almost paternal kindness towards the bewildered, often malnourished children who stared up at them with wide, fearful eyes. The shock was palpable. Everything they had been told, every terrifying image seared into their minds by years of propaganda, began to crumble in the face of this bewildering reality. The monsters were sharing food. The savages were helping. The devils were smiling. The physical contrast between the two groups was stark and undeniable. The American soldiers, well-fed, robust, and often towering over the smaller, gaunt Japanese populace, exuded a physical health and vitality that was almost alien. Their uniforms were clean, their boots sturdy, their movements confident. But it wasn't just their physical stature that captivated the Japanese women. It was the underlying strength they projected, a strength that transcended mere muscle. It was a moral character, an unexpected generosity, an unwavering optimism in the face of widespread destruction. This was a strength that challenged the very foundation of their wartime beliefs, forcing them to confront the terrifying possibility that their entire worldview had been built on a lie. The initial terror slowly began to give way to a profound, unsettling curiosity, a desperate need to understand these bewildering, benevolent invaders, a truly perplexing situation. The daily rhythm of occupation quickly settled into a complex dance of rebuilding and cultural exchange. American soldiers, far from being idle, plunged into the monumental task of reconstruction. They were seen everywhere, clearing rubble from roads, repairing vital infrastructure like bridges and communication lines, and, perhaps most crucially, distributing essential food supplies to a starving populace. Medical clinics were swiftly established, staffed by American military doctors and nurses who, with surprising dedication, began treating Japanese civilians suffering from malnutrition, disease, and injuries sustained during the bombings. These were not acts of charity in the traditional sense, but pragmatic steps towards stabilizing a defeated nation, driven by a blend of military necessity and an underlying American humanitarian impulse. Yet the operational challenges were immense. The most immediate hurdle was the formidable language barrier. Few American soldiers spoke Japanese, and even fewer Japanese civilians spoke English. This led to countless moments of cultural misunderstanding, awkward gestures, and often unintentional humor. Residual fear and mistrust lingered like a heavy fog, especially among the older generations who had lived through decades of imperialistic fervor. American pragmatism, however, proved to be a powerful tool. Soldiers improvised communication through elaborate hand gestures, simple drawings in the dirt, and the painstaking learning of basic Japanese phrases like arigato, thank you, and kodomo, child. These small, often clumsy efforts, however, spoke volumes, demonstrating a willingness to connect that transcended the linguistic divide. Specific scenes became etched into the collective memory of the Japanese women. A soldier, perhaps a young man from Kansas, would share his chocolate bar with a group of emaciated children, his face creased with a gentle concern that belied his uniform. GIs, with their sleeves rolled up, would labor alongside Japanese men, helping to rebuild a destroyed schoolhouse, their sweat mingling in the dust. American medics, often working long hours, would patiently tend to the wounds of Japanese civilians, their touch gentle, their demeanor respectful. These were not isolated incidents. They were the daily fabric of the occupation, slowly, painstakingly weaving a new narrative that contradicted every piece of wartime propaganda. The physical strength that had initially captivated the Japanese women now took on new dimensions. It wasn't just the robust health of the Americans, their confident posture, or their casual ability to lift heavy rubble and carry supplies with apparent ease. It was the emotional strength that truly resonated. This manifested as an extraordinary patience with frightened civilians, a remarkable kindness despite being in what was, technically, enemy territory, and an unwavering optimism about the prospect of rebuilding, even amidst such profound devastation. This emotional resilience, this capacity for empathy in the face of such a stark power imbalance, was a revelation. American values, often unspoken but deeply ingrained, were on full display. The way American soldiers treated women, for instance, was a profound shock. In a society where women were traditionally subservient and often viewed as property, the GIs exhibited a respectful, almost egalitarian demeanor. They did not demand, they offered. They did not exploit, they assisted. This stark contrast to the hierarchical and often brutal Japanese military culture was deeply unsettling, yet undeniably appealing. A distribution was conducted with a sense of fairness, without overt discrimination, reinforcing the idea of equality. Genuine smiles and friendly gestures, devoid of malice or condescension, became commonplace, slowly eroding the walls of fear. Yet it would be a disservice to paint the American soldiers as one-dimensional heroes. They too were dealing with their own profound trauma, the lingering horrors of combat, and the gnawing ache of missing their families thousands of miles away. They were trying to be ambassadors of their nation while simultaneously processing their own war experiences, often in a foreign land with an alien culture. This duality, this human cost, added another layer of complexity to their interactions. But through it all, their resilience, their innate decency, and their commitment to the task at hand shone through, slowly but surely building a cultural bridge, demonstrating the profound power of human decency to overcome the deepest scars of propaganda and war, a truly remarkable feat. The unfolding reality of the American occupation presented a profound and perplexing dilemma for the remnants of the Japanese military and the hardline nationalists who had championed the war. Their entire ideological framework, built upon the premise of American barbarity and a clash of civilizations, was being systematically dismantled by the very actions of the occupiers. Their propaganda had predicted mass violence, systematic abuse, and the subjugation of the Japanese people. Instead, what they observed, often through clandestine channels or from the bewildered reports of their own citizens, was an organized, if sometimes chaotic, humanitarian effort. Intelligence reports, initially dismissed as anomalies or enemy deception, began to paint a consistent picture. The Americans were not behaving like the monsters they were supposed to be. This created a deep, doctrinal conflict. Japanese militaristic culture, forged in decades of imperial expansion, emphasized dominance, conquest, and the subjugation of conquered peoples. Their own conduct in occupied territories across Asia had been brutal, leaving a legacy of atrocities. The American approach, however, was fundamentally different. It emphasized reconstruction, rehabilitation, and ultimately, partnership. This was an alien concept, almost incomprehensible to a mindset steeped in the rigid hierarchies of power and submission. How could an enemy, having achieved total victory, choose to rebuild rather than simply exploit? The impact of this cognitive dissonance was perhaps best personified in individual observations. A former Japanese officer, stripped of his rank and authority, might witness American soldiers sharing their rations with his starving family, their laughter echoing through the ruins. A nationalist teacher, who had once passionately taught the evils of the West, might watch in stunned silence as GIs, with surprising diligence, helped repair her bombed-out school, their hands calloused from labor. A mother, who had prepared to sacrifice herself and her child rather than face the devils, might find herself watching in awe as an American medic, with practiced skill and genuine concern, saved her child's life from a preventable illness. These were not abstract reports. These were visceral personal experiences that shattered deeply held beliefs. The strength that Japanese women had begun to perceive was now fully revealed in its most profound form. It was not the strength to destroy, which Japan had expected and indeed had demonstrated itself. It was the strength to show mercy, to extend a hand of friendship to a defeated foe, to rebuild what had been shattered, and to foster hope where only despair had reigned. This was a strength of character, a moral fortitude that transcended military might. It was the strength to forgive, to look beyond the recent past, and to envision a future of cooperation. Specific validation moments became increasingly common. Japanese women, initially hesitant, began openly approaching Americans for help, whether it was for food, medicine, or assistance in clearing debris. Children, shedding their initial fear, started playing games with soldiers, their innocent laughter a powerful antidote to the lingering tension. Community meals, often improvised with American rations and local produce, began to foster a sense of shared humanity. The perplexity among the Japanese was profound. How could the enemy, the very embodiment of evil in their propaganda, be so fundamentally different from what they had been told? How could they be so generous, so kind, so genuinely interested in their well-being? The American optimism and their characteristic can-do spirit proved infectious. They tackled the immense challenges of Reconstruction with an energy that seemed boundless, transforming devastated communities block by block, village by village. This stood in stark contrast to the rigid hierarchy and often fatalistic outlook of the former Japanese military. From the women's perspective, this redefinition of strength was revolutionary. It was no longer about domination or conquest, but about protection, generosity, and an unwavering moral courage that sought to uplift rather than oppress. This was the turning point. Japanese civilians, led by the women who had witnessed these acts of unexpected kindness, began to trust, to hope, and to rebuild their lives alongside their former enemies, laying the groundwork for an unimaginable future. A truly profound shift. The American occupation of Japan, initially viewed with dread, ultimately forged an enduring legacy that transformed a militaristic empire into a democratic ally. The profound impact of that initial encounter, when Japanese women first witnessed the unexpected character of American soldiers, reverberated through generations. These women, who had been forced to confront the stark discrepancy between wartime propaganda and the reality of American benevolence, became quiet but powerful advocates for a new Japan. They embraced the nascent democratic ideals, championed women's rights in a society traditionally dominated by men, and fostered cultural exchange, understanding that true strength lay not in isolation, but in connection. Their experiences laid the groundwork for a societal shift that would redefine Japan's place in the world. The statistical impact of this cultural encounter was significant. Thousands of Japanese women married American soldiers, becoming war brides who bravely crossed oceans to build new lives and bridge two vastly different cultures. These personal unions were microcosms of a larger cultural exchange, fostering understanding and breaking down barriers. The children of these mixed marriages became living symbols of reconciliation, embodying the possibility of unity after conflict. On a broader scale, the trust established during the occupation, coupled with substantial American aid, became a crucial catalyst for Japan's post-war economic miracle. The foundation of this economic resurgence was not just financial investment, but the psychological and social stability fostered by a benevolent occupation. The redefinition of strength was perhaps the most profound and lasting lesson for Japanese society. The nation learned, through direct observation and experience, that true strength encompassed compassion, generosity, and the capacity for forgiveness. It demonstrated that power could be wielded not just for destruction, but for building, for healing, and for fostering peace. This was a radical departure from the imperialistic ethos that had led Japan into war. Decades later, elderly Japanese women, their faces etched with the wisdom of years, would still recount stories of that first encounter. They would speak of how their initial terror transformed into respect, how the unexpected kindness of American soldiers fundamentally changed their understanding of the world, and how it opened their eyes to a different path for their nation. The historical validation of this unique occupation is undeniable. The US-Japan alliance, born from the ashes of war, has become one of the strongest and most enduring partnerships in modern history, a testament to the power of reconciliation and shared values. This alliance is rooted in those early days when ordinary American soldiers, often young and far from home, demonstrated extraordinary character. They were not just soldiers, they were unwitting ambassadors of democracy and human dignity, their actions speaking louder than any diplomatic pronouncements. The overarching themes of this historical chapter are clear: the immense power of human decency to transform history, the critical importance of cultural respect in overcoming deep-seated animosities, and the profound legacy of choosing mercy and reconstruction over vengeance and continued conflict. The final reflection remains poignant. The strength that Japanese women witnessed was not merely military might, though that was certainly present. It was, more profoundly, the strength of American values, the power of optimism, the inherent generosity, and the unwavering belief in human potential to heal even the deepest wounds of war. It was how ordinary farm boys and factory workers from America, thrust into an unprecedented role, became the unlikely architects of a new future, transforming former enemies into enduring friends. This enduring lesson continues to resonate. True strength is measured not by the capacity to destroy one's enemies, but by the courage and compassion to transform them into allies and partners for a better world. A truly profound truth. This narrative offers a glimpse into a pivotal, often overlooked chapter of American history. It's a story not of battles, but of hearts and minds won, of propaganda shattered by unexpected kindness. We invite you to reflect on the profound impact of American values on a defeated nation, and how ordinary soldiers became agents of extraordinary change. Share your thoughts, subscribe for more historical insights, and help us keep these vital stories alive for future generations, a truly important endeavor.